There's something strange about the way we make choices. You might think you know why you said yes, why you walked away, or why you texted that person back, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't. But if you look a little closer, you'll start to notice that most of your decisions are made long before you become aware of them. Freud believed that beneath the thin layer of your consciousness, there is a quiet machinery, your unconscious, making choices, pulling strings, guiding your reactions, and shaping the story of your life in ways you rarely see. When you choose, it is not only you who chooses. It is a crowd inside you. It is the voice of your mother when you were 6, the absence of your father when you were 15, the unhealed pain you buried when you couldn't handle it. Every decision you call your own carries the fingerprints of your past, of your fears, of your desire to avoid pain or repeat pleasure. You might think you choose rationally, you might think you choose freely. But what if your freedom is mostly an illusion? What if every time you say, "I decided," what you really mean is something inside me decided, and then I found a way to justify it? Freud saw this clearly. He saw that the conscious mind, the one we use to tell stories about ourselves, is just a small island floating in a dark ocean. The ocean is the unconscious, deep, restless, full of forces that never sleep. And what we call decision-making is often the meeting of these two worlds. The conscious mind receives the message, but the unconscious wrote it first. Imagine standing before two doors. Behind one is what you consciously want: the promotion, the relationship, the trip, the new beginning. Behind the other is what your unconscious needs: safety, repetition, familiarity, even pain if it's the pain you've learned to survive. You will almost always walk through the second door, because even though you believe you're chasing happiness, you're often chasing what feels like home, and home psychologically is not always a place of peace. It's the place of what's familiar, even when it hurts. That is why people return to relationships that break them, careers that suffocate them, patterns that drain them. Freud would say, you are not irrational, you are loyal to your inner patterns, to your earliest emotional truths. Your decisions are conversations between who you are and who you were, the part of you that wants to move forward and the part of you that cannot let go. And this is why so much of life feels like contradiction. You say you want change, but you sabotage it. You say you want closeness, but you withdraw. You say you're ready to heal, but you find comfort in your wounds. Freud didn't judge this. He understood it as a natural expression of the mind's defense mechanisms, those invisible psychological guardians that try to protect you from emotional pain, even when their protection keeps you trapped. Take repression, for example. You think you've forgotten something painful, but it's only been pushed below awareness. The energy of that memory doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes hesitation or anxiety or the strange feeling that you're living on repeat. Then comes rationalization, the story your conscious mind invents to make sense of the choice your unconscious already made. You say, I didn't call her because I was busy, but the truth might be that calling her would remind you of a part of yourself you don't want to feel again. You say, I left that job because it wasn't for me. But maybe the deeper truth is that success awakens an old guilt, the fear of surpassing someone you once loved who couldn't succeed. Freud helps us see that every decision hides a hidden dialogue. A decision to love, to leave, to speak, or to remain silent is never only about the present. It is also about the ghosts of the past. Your mind is full of these ghosts. They whisper in the background as you navigate your life. They tell you who you should be, what you deserve, when to stay silent, when to run. Sometimes they sound like your parents. Sometimes they sound like your younger self. Sometimes they sound like no one you can recognize because they come from the earliest, most forgotten parts of your experience, the pre-verbal moments when your nervous system learned what safety means. If you've ever felt torn between what you know you should do and what you end up doing, you've already met this invisible force. Freud would say, this is the conflict between your ego and your ID. between the reality principle and the pleasure principle. The ego tries to be reasonable, to follow the rules of society, to do what makes sense. The id doesn't care about sense. It wants what it wants. It is primitive, emotional, immediate. But the third element, the superego, also speaks. It is the voice of internalized authority, of morality, of judgment. It tells you what's right and wrong, often with the tone of those who raised you. And between these three, the id, the ego, the superego, your choices are born, not as clear acts of freedom, but as negotiated truces. Every decision is a compromise between desire, reality, and guilt. So when you stand before a choice, you are not alone. You are accompanied by this inner committee. Freud once described the mind as a battlefield of forces. Your decisions are the outcome of that battle, the moment when one side wins and another retreats. But the defeated side never dies. It waits. It returns later, disguised as a new impulse, a new mistake, a new longing. That's why some patterns feel eternal. You think you've changed, but you keep meeting the same situation in different clothes. That's your unconscious trying to finish an old story through new characters. Pause for a moment. Think about a decision you regret, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What were you really trying to do beneath the surface? Were you trying to avoid rejection? Were you trying to repeat a pain that felt familiar? Were you trying to prove something to someone who wasn't even there anymore? This is where Freud's insights become deeply human. He didn't reduce people to their neuroses. He tried to help them see their hidden logic. Even your worst decisions made sense to some part of you. They were attempts at protection, at mastery, at love. If you've ever wondered why you keep choosing what hurts, Freud would say, because what hurts often feels like home. Because somewhere in your psyche, pain and love were learned together, and until that connection is seen, you will keep walking toward it. The unconscious does not heal by being ignored. It heals by being understood. Before we go further, I'd like to invite you to pause and reflect. If you find meaning in what you're hearing, subscribe. This channel is a space for gentle introspection, not judgment, a place where you can understand yourself a little better every week. There's no rush, no pressure, just an open invitation to explore what's hidden beneath your choices, your emotions, and your stories. You may believe that your decisions are shaped by the present moment, by logic, by the situation before you, by who you have become. But in Freud's view, what drives you most strongly are not the choices of the present, but the repetitions of the past. You do not simply decide, you reenact. Again and again, you find yourself in the same emotional theater, surrounded by different actors, but playing the same role. Freud called this the repetition compulsion, the strange and painful tendency of the human mind to recreate old conflicts, as if life were trying to give you another chance to resolve them. Think of the moments when you thought, not again. The same kind of person, the same disappointment, the same end. You told yourself you had learned, you were sure this time would be different. Yet somehow, without realizing it, you walked right back into the same emotional script. Freud would tell you that your unconscious is not cruel, it is faithful. It keeps repeating what it cannot yet understand. It keeps creating opportunities to master what once overwhelmed you. Each repetition is an attempt at healing, but healing cannot happen while the story remains unconscious. That is why awareness, painful as it is, becomes freedom. When you begin to see your decisions not as random mistakes, but as unconscious repetitions, something shifts. The guilt softens, the confusion clears. You start to recognize that even your self-destructive choices were efforts to restore a sense of control. The child inside you who once felt powerless tries, through your adult decisions, to rewrite that powerlessness. But because that child is still blind to the origins of the pain, the rewriting becomes a repetition. You fall for the unavailable partner, not because you want to suffer, but because part of you believes that this time, love will stay. You overwork yourself, not because you enjoy exhaustion, but because some forgotten part of you learned that love must be earned through effort. Every decision that puzzles you has an emotional logic if you trace it back far enough. Freud's genius was not in finding darkness inside us, but in helping us see meaning where we thought there was only chaos. He taught that the irrational is not meaningless, it is just unspoken. Your decisions speak a language you forgot you knew. They are coded messages from your unconscious, written in emotion instead of words. The way you choose, the way you react, the way you hesitate, all of it carries a grammar of your inner history. Let's imagine a moment. You're offered a chance at something you've always wanted, but you feel an unexpected resistance. A voice inside you whispers, "Be careful, this is too good, don't risk it." You might think it's intuition, and sometimes it is, but often it's fear disguised as wisdom. That voice may belong to your superego, repeating the warnings of your early caretakers. It might be your unconscious trying to protect you from disappointment by keeping you within familiar limits. You tell yourself you're being rational, but in truth, you're defending an old wound. Freud would ask you, what emotion do you fear most in this decision? Is it rejection, humiliation, guilt, loss? Beneath every hesitation lies a fear, and beneath every fear lies a memory. The unconscious does not forget, it only transforms. The memory of being unseen may become the fear of failure. The memory of being controlled may become the hunger for independence. The memory of being shamed may become the drive for perfection. So, your decisions, even the smallest ones, are guided by emotional maps written long ago. That's why therapy, in Freud's sense, was not about advice, but about discovery. The goal was to bring the unconscious into awareness, to make the hidden motives visible, to let the repressed speak. Because once you name what drives you, it begins to lose its invisible power. When you realize that you're not lazy but afraid, not indecisive but conflicted, not cold but defended, a new kind of choice becomes possible. You start to choose consciously, not reactively. You begin to act rather than repeat. But awareness often arrives with pain. The first reaction to seeing your unconscious patterns is not liberation, but grief, the grief of realizing how much of your life was shaped by things you didn't know you were carrying. Freud understood this as the cost of truth. The psyche resists self-knowledge because it threatens its defenses. You may notice this resistance when you rationalize, when you dismiss insights as overthinking, when you feel an urge to stop reflecting just as something meaningful begins to surface. These resistances are not failures. They are proof that something inside you is being touched. The unconscious protects itself until it feels safe to reveal. And yet, every decision that brings you closer to understanding yourself is a small act of freedom. You can begin by noticing your everyday moments of choice. The times you say yes when you mean no. The times you hold back a truth. The times you repeat what hurts. Freud would say, follow the discomfort. Where your reactions feel strongest, your unconscious is nearest the surface. That irritation you feel towards someone might be less about them and more about an unresolved emotion they awaken in you. The irritation is the conscious surface. The memory underneath is the unconscious depth. If you start paying attention, life becomes a kind of analysis. Every conflict becomes a clue. Every emotion, a messenger. Freud didn't intend for people to become trapped in self-analysis. He wanted them to develop a deeper curiosity about their own minds, to ask, not what is wrong with me, but what is my mind trying to show me through this decision, this feeling, this dream? The answer is rarely simple, but always human. The more you understand this, the more compassion you develop for yourself. You begin to see that the same forces that make you struggle also make you human. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It is your history seeking expression. When you ignore it, it rules you. When you listen, it teaches you. And every time you bring one of its hidden truths into consciousness, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. Now I want to ask you something, and if you're watching this, I'd love for you to answer in the comments, not for me, but for yourself. What decision in your life do you now see differently after hearing this? What might your unconscious have been trying to say through that choice? If you want to share, you can write this phrase in the comments. I see now that my choice was a reflection of what I couldn't yet understand. Write it if it feels right to you. Your story might help someone else recognize theirs. Freud believed that sharing is part of healing, that when we put our inner life into words, we transform it. So don't underestimate what your reflection can awaken in another person. There's another layer to your decisions, one that Freud touched, but that modern psychology continues to explore. It's the role of desire. Not desire in the shallow sense, but in the deep, existential one. Desire for Freud is never fully satisfied because what we want is not the thing itself, but what it represents. You don't just want love. You want the feeling of being seen, of being held in the gaze that once comforted you. You don't just want success. You want to feel worthy, to silence the inner doubt that says you're not enough. So even when you reach your goals, the satisfaction fades quickly because the unconscious desire remains unsatisfied. The external achievement cannot fill the internal absence. That is why you can get what you wanted and still feel empty. The decision that looked right on the outside may have been driven by an unconscious longing you didn't know how to name. And so, once again, the pattern repeats: the pursuit, the achievement, the emptiness. Freud would tell you not to despair at this, but to listen. The emptiness is not punishment, it's a signal. It tells you that you've been chasing the symbol, not the source. And the source is always emotional. It lies in the earliest places where your psyche learned what love, safety, and worthiness mean. So the task is not to make perfect decisions, but to make conscious ones. To pause and ask, what part of me is choosing right now? Is it the adult who knows what I value, or the child who's still trying to earn love? Is it fear choosing, or freedom? This simple awareness changes everything. Because when you see your motives clearly, you are no longer their prisoner. There comes a point when you begin to realize that life is not a series of random events, but a mirror of your inner world. The people you meet, the opportunities you attract, the things you avoid, they all reflect what is active within you. Freud's insight into human decision-making wasn't meant to strip you of your sense of control. It was meant to awaken you to the truth that your control is deeper than you think. You don't control life by forcing it to obey your conscious will. You shape it by understanding the unconscious patterns that drive your will itself. Every decision you make is like a photograph of your current state of awareness. Change the awareness, and the picture changes. But this awareness is not something that arrives all at once. It comes slowly, through moments of discomfort, through small realizations that seem to echo from the past. You might catch yourself hesitating before saying yes to something good, and you'll suddenly realize the hesitation doesn't belong to the present. It belongs to an older fear. You might feel anxious before a new beginning and see that it's not the situation that scares you, but the memory it awakens. That's how you begin to see what Freud meant when he said that the past is never past. It lives inside the present moment, waiting to be seen, waiting to be released. Many people misunderstand Freud as someone obsessed with pathology, with the brokenness of the human mind. But if you listen carefully, you'll find that what he really offered was a path toward compassion. He showed us that the parts of ourselves we reject, the irrational, the impulsive, the frightened, are not enemies, but exiled children of our psyche. When you start to make decisions with that understanding, something softens inside you. You stop punishing yourself for being inconsistent, for failing, for repeating patterns. You begin to see that every pattern, even the painful ones, is a form of communication. Your unconscious is trying to tell you something in the only language it knows. repetition, emotion, dreams, and desire. Think of the last time you did something that made no sense to you. Maybe you reached out to someone you knew wasn't right for you. Maybe you quit something you cared about. Maybe you stayed quiet when your heart wanted to speak. Freud would tell you that even those decisions were meaningful. You were reenacting a scene from your emotional history. The mind tries to heal by repeating what it couldn't resolve. The tragedy is that the repetition never works until you bring it to light. Once you see it, you no longer have to repeat it. Seeing transforms repetition into understanding, and understanding transforms pain into wisdom. When you begin to live with this awareness, your choices start to feel lighter. You no longer chase happiness as something to be achieved. You start to create it as a byproduct of understanding yourself. You realize that freedom isn't the absence of your unconscious. It's the dialogue with it. You don't silence your inner voices. You listen to them with kindness. You ask, what are you afraid of? What are you trying to protect? And when those parts of you feel heard, they stop controlling you from the shadows. Freud's theory of the unconscious wasn't just a scientific idea. It was a philosophy of empathy. He believed that to understand a person's behavior, you had to look beneath the surface to the unspoken needs, the unhealed sorrows, the dreams that once kept them alive. When you apply that to yourself, your decisions stop being sources of shame. They become doorways. Even the wrong turns reveal something sacred, the map of your inner world. And this is where something profound happens. You begin to see that what you're not seeing has always been guiding you. The invisible forces you feared are not monsters, but memories. When you bring them into awareness, you stop living in reaction to them. You start living with them. You integrate. Freud called this process working through. It's the slow, gentle labor of making peace between the conscious and the unconscious. It takes time, honesty, and courage. It's not about fixing yourself, but about remembering yourself. You might wonder, how do I know when I'm making a conscious decision? The answer is simple, though not easy. Conscious decisions feel peaceful, even when they're difficult. Unconscious ones feel urgent, heavy, or confusing. When you act from awareness, there's clarity beneath the uncertainty. You may still feel fear, but it's a clean fear, one that moves you forward rather than keeping you stuck. Unconscious fear, on the other hand, feels like a loop. You return to the same crossroads again and again. The difference is not in the outcome, but in the presence of awareness. Freud often said that people are not afraid of suffering. They are afraid of discovering its meaning. Because once you see the meaning, you cannot go back to sleep. You begin to live more deliberately. You start to ask yourself, is this decision a repetition or a creation? Am I reliving my past, or am I writing something new? That single question can change your life. Because if you learn to pause, even for a moment before you act, you open a space where freedom can enter. And in that space, you may notice that the unconscious no longer has to scream. It can whisper. It can become a companion rather than a master. The truth is, you will never completely escape your unconscious. It is part of what makes you human. But you can build a relationship with it, one founded on curiosity instead of fear. That relationship changes the way you decide, love, work, and dream. It turns your life into a dialogue between the seen and the unseen. Freud believed that this dialogue was the essence of maturity, not to be free of conflict, but to live with awareness of it. As you listen to this, perhaps you feel a quiet recognition, a sense that your decisions, even the most painful ones, make more sense than you thought. Maybe you realize that what you called self-sabotage was really self-protection, that what you called failure was actually a moment of honesty between your conscious and unconscious selves. And maybe, just maybe, you can begin to forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. Because none of us do. We live our way into awareness. So the next time you face a choice, pause. Feel the subtle currents beneath your thoughts. Ask yourself whose voice you're hearing. Is it yours, Or is it the echo of someone from long ago, still trying to be heard? The act of noticing is enough. Awareness itself begins to change the pattern. The unconscious doesn't vanish when you understand it, but it no longer needs to control you. It relaxes. It breathes. Freud once wrote that where the id was, the ego shall be. In other words, where unconscious forces once ruled blindly, awareness will take their place. That is the journey of every person who dares to look inward, to turn darkness into understanding, compulsion into choice, confusion into meaning. You don't have to analyze yourself endlessly. You only need to be honest with what you feel and curious about why you feel it. The unconscious reveals itself not through intellect, but through tenderness. And that's the invitation of this reflection. To be tender with yourself, to stop asking why you keep choosing what you choose and start asking what those choices are trying to tell you. Every decision is a message. Every mistake is an opportunity to listen more deeply. Every hesitation is a doorway to a part of you that still longs to be understood. If this message touched something in you, if it helped you see your choices in a new light, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe, not for algorithms or numbers, but for a shared journey of awareness. Each week, we'll explore more of these hidden dimensions, the quiet motives, the emotional roots, the ways we can bring the unconscious into the light of consciousness. It's a gentle space, a space to breathe, reflect, and grow. You are not broken for making the same decisions. You are human for trying to understand them. And as you keep looking inward, you may find that what you are not seeing was never meant to condemn you. It was meant to guide you home. Because in the end, Freud's great message was not about the darkness of the mind, but about its possibility for light. Awareness is the light. And every time you choose to see, you choose to be free.